The first message came at 4 in the morning my time, which was afternoon where Derek was. And I knew before I opened it that something was wrong, because he never messaged during his duty hours, unless it was to say he loved us. This one just said, "Call me when you can," and my whole body went cold in the dark of our bedroom, the ceiling fan turning slow above me. Because when your husband is deployed halfway around the world, those 5 words can mean anything, and your mind goes to the worst thing first every single time. But it was not the worst thing, or at least not the kind of worst thing I had spent 9 months bracing for. Derek was fine. Derek was safe. That was the first thing he said when I got him on the line, and I sat down on the edge of the bed with my hand over my mouth and let myself breathe. And then he told me the rest, and it was a different kind of gut punch. The slow kind. The kind that does not knock you down all at once, but leans on you a little heavier every day until you can barely stand up under it. The truck was gone. Our truck, the one sitting in our own driveway when I went to sleep, was not there anymore. Someone had come in the night and taken it, and Derek had gotten an alert on his phone from the bank. And now he was 10,000 miles away, trying to figure out from a shared computer in a rec tent how a lender could reach into our driveway and pull a truck out from under a deployed soldier's family. I walked to the front window with the phone still to my ear and pulled the curtain back. And he was right. Just an empty rectangle of oil-stained concrete where the truck had been. And Noah's bike leaning against the garage where the tailgate used to be. Let me back up, because you need to understand who we were before all this, so you understand why it hit the way it did. My name is Megan. My husband Derek is a sergeant in the Army National Guard, and he has been in for 11 years, since before we met, since before our kids, since before any of the life we built. People forget, when they think about soldiers deploying, that the Guard is different. Derek was not career military living on a base with everything handled. Derek had a regular civilian job as a diesel mechanic, and 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a summer he was a soldier. And then one day the orders came for a 9-month deployment, and he was a soldier full-time. And the rest of us were left to run the whole life he left behind. We were not rich. I want to be clear about that, because I think the people who did this to us were counting on exactly what we were, which was a young family living close to the line. Derek made decent money as a mechanic, and I worked part-time at a pediatric dental office, so I could still be home when the kids got off the bus. Between the two of us, we were fine. Not comfortable, but fine. The trouble with a Guard deployment is that Derek's military pay did not fully replace his civilian mechanic's wages. So the same month he shipped out, our household income dropped, and every fixed bill we had stayed exactly the same size. The truck was the biggest of those bills. It was a work truck, 3 years old, and Derek had bought it 2 years before the deployment ever came, with a loan through a lender that specialized, and I use that word carefully, in car loans to military families. They advertised right outside the base gate. Support our troops, easy approval. We understand military life. All of it. Big and patriotic on the billboard. Derek had a loan with them at an interest rate that was frankly ugly. But he had a job that needed a truck and a growing family. And you sign what you have to sign when you are 26 and your knees are still good and the future looks long. I should tell you how we met, because it matters to how all of this felt. Derek came into the shop where my dad worked when I was 22, a young soldier with grease under his nails, even on a Saturday, there to help my father wrestle a transmission that was fighting both of them. He stayed for dinner. He came back the next Saturday when there was no transmission to fix. My father, who did not hand out approval, said after the 3rd visit that the boy showed up on time and cleaned up after himself, which from my dad was practically a wedding toast. We married 2 years later in a church with folding chairs and a potluck reception, and Derek wore his dress uniform. and I have never in my life felt as safe as I did that day. That is the thing I keep circling back to, the safety. Derek is not a big talker, and he is not a man who says he loves you every hour. He is a man who checks the oil in your car without being asked, and stands between you and the door in a parking lot at night without seeming to think about it. Marrying him felt like being handed a roof over my head that would never leak. So the cruelty of what happened, the specific cruelty of it landing while he was gone, was that it came for me in the one season of our marriage when the roof was somewhere else, holding up something else, and I had to be the roof myself, and did not yet know if I could. The morning he left for the deployment is burned into me. We had the kids up before dawn because the buses staged early, and Emma, who was 4 and did not really understand, kept asking if Daddy was going to work, and Derek kept saying, "Yes, buddy, a long shift." Because how do you explain 9 months to a 4-year-old? Noah understood more, and Noah did not cry, which was worse, because he held it in the way he had watched his father hold things in. This 7-year-old boy trying to be a man on a cold armory tarmac. Derek knelt down in front of both of them and told Noah, "You help your mom." And Noah nodded like he had been given an order. And then Derek stood up and held me for a long time and said into my hair, "I hate this part." And then he let go and walked to the bus, and he did not look back, because he told me later he could not have gotten on if he had. Here is the part that mattered, the part I did not understand yet that first morning at the window. When Derek got his deployment orders, we did what responsible people do. We sat down at the kitchen table with all our bills and we made a plan. And one of the things we did was call that lender, the military-friendly one, and tell them Derek was deploying, and ask what our options were. The person on the phone was very nice. They said not to worry, that they worked with service members all the time, that everything would be fine. We took them at their word. That was our mistake, if you can call trusting people who advertise their support for troops a mistake. Because everything was not fine. What happened, as best as I could reconstruct it later, was that our reduced income meant that 1 month the truck payment came out a few days late and short. Not missed, late and short. I had shuffled money to keep the lights on, and the rent paid, and food in front of 2 kids, and I had made a partial payment on the truck, fully intending to catch it up on my next paycheck. And I had even called and left a message saying exactly that. And that lender, the one that understood military life, the one on the billboard, waited until the account was technically in default. And then they sent a repossession company to our house in the middle of the night to take the truck out of the driveway of a deployed soldier. I did not know yet that what they had done was not just cruel. I did not know it was illegal. All I knew that first week was that I had 2 kids, a job that needed me to drive them to daycare and school and get myself to the dental office, and no vehicle, in a town where the nearest bus line was a joke and a rideshare to work cost more than I made in the first hour of my shift. So I did what you do. I begged rides from other guard spouses. I put Noah, who was 7, and Emma, who was 4, in the back of a neighbor's minivan and apologized until she told me to stop apologizing. And I tried, in the cracks of the day, to get the truck back, and I ran straight into a wall built specifically to keep people like me out. The lender's customer service line was a maze. Every person I got told me the same script in the same soothing voice. The account was in default. The vehicle had been lawfully repossessed. To recover it, I would need to pay the full past due balance, plus a repossession fee of $450, plus storage fees that were accruing at $35 a day, plus a reinstatement fee. And when I added it all up on the back of an envelope at my kitchen table with Emma asleep on my shoulder, it came to almost $3,000.
Money I did not have, and they knew I did not have. And every day I did not have it, the storage fee grew, which meant every day the truck moved a little further out of reach. That was the design. That was the whole point. Wait long enough, and the family gives up, and you sell the truck at auction and keep the deposit and the payments and the truck too. You do not understand what a vehicle is to a family until it is gone. It is not a luxury. It is the thread that holds the whole day together.
Without it, I could not get Emma to daycare, which meant I could not get to my shift, which meant I lost hours, which meant the next payment on everything got harder, which was exactly the spiral they were counting on. I made a color-coded chart on the back of a grocery receipt of who could drive me where and when, and it looked like the schedule of a person barely keeping her head above water. Because it was. The worst day of that first stretch was the day Emma spiked a fever. It came up fast, the way it does with little ones. 103 by the afternoon, her cheeks flushed and her eyes glassy. And she was crying, and I could not get her comfortable, and I had no way to get her to the pediatrician. No truck. Diane was 2 towns over at her own kid's thing. I stood in my kitchen holding my burning up baby, dialing down a list of names, and the shame of it, the sheer helplessness of being a mother who cannot drive her sick child to a doctor because a company took the car out of the driveway, is a thing I will feel in my chest for the rest of my life. A neighbor 2 doors down finally drove us. Emma was fine, an ear infection, but I sat in that waiting room shaking. And I want to be honest about the small humiliations too, because they add up and they are part of how they wear you down. Asking my boss at the dental office, again, if I could shift my hours because my ride fell through. Watching her patients get thinner each time, a good woman who liked me but had a business to run and could not keep rearranging a schedule around a truck that was not coming back. Standing at the bus stop in the rain with Noah because we could not drive the 4 minutes we used to drive. The way strangers do not see any of it. The way the world just moves past a woman doing quiet math on a receipt, and how invisible that kind of drowning is. That was the season the messages with Derek got bad. He would call and I would try to sound like I had it handled, because what could he do from there except lie awake? And he would hear right through me, because 11 years of marriage means you cannot hide your voice. He felt every mile of the distance as a failure, and I felt every hour of the grind as a weight. And one night, the bad night, he said something sharp about how he never should have trusted that lender. And I heard it as blame. And I said something back that I regret. And then there was that silence. The awful satellite silence. And he said, quietly, I am supposed to be able to protect you. And I have never in my life been so far from being able to. And then the call dropped. And I did not know if it dropped or if he ended it. And I sat on the kitchen floor, and that was the night I made the promise to myself. And then, because the world has a sense of humor that is not funny at all, the second letter came. This one was from our landlord. We rented a small 3-bedroom house in a subdivision that had been thrown up fast about 15 years ago. The kind of place where every 4th house is the same floor plan flipped backward. Our landlord was not a person exactly. It was a property management company that ran a few hundred rental homes across the county. And you never met a human. You just paid a portal and submitted maintenance requests into a void. When Derek deployed, I had actually looked into whether we could get out of the lease, because the house was really more than we needed with him gone. And it would have been smart to move the kids and me into something smaller and cheaper for the 9 months. But breaking a lease meant losing the deposit and paying a penalty of 2 months' rent. Or so the portal told me. and I could not afford to eat that cost. So we stayed. The letter from the management company informed me that they had, in reviewing our account, noticed that the vehicle registered to the property had been repossessed, which flagged us in some system as a financial risk. And that combined with the fact that my rent payment that same hard month had also been a few days late. They were now issuing a notice of intent to begin eviction proceedings. 30 days. 2 kids, one of them not even in kindergarten, a husband in a combat zone, and a form letter telling me that in 30 days, a court could put us on the curb. I read it 3 times standing at the mailbox, certain I was misunderstanding. Because who does this? Who sees a note in a system that says a soldier's truck was repossessed and decides that the correct response is to try to remove his wife and small children from their home? But of course, that is exactly the logic of it, once you see it clearly. To a company that manages a few hundred houses through a portal, we were not a family. We were a risk score that had ticked upward, and the process that kicked in when a score ticked upward did not know or care that the reason it ticked was that another company had illegally towed our truck while the man of the house was deployed. 2 automated cruelties feeding each other, with a real mother standing in a mailbox in between them. It is a particular thing, being turned into a data point by 2 companies at once, while the person who would normally stand beside you is somewhere you cannot even picture. I did not have Derek to look at across the kitchen and say, "Can you believe this?" I had a phone that let me talk to him for 15 minutes if the satellites cooperated, and a to-do list that had grown a new line at the top overnight. Do not let them evict the children. And no idea yet that the same law that would bring the truck home had, waiting inside it, the exact tool to make this second letter fall apart in their hands. I want to tell you I handled it with grace. I did not. I sat on the floor of the kitchen after the kids were finally asleep, with the repossession paperwork in one hand and the eviction notice in the other. And I cried the kind of ugly, silent, shaking cry you cry when you cannot make a sound because the children might hear. I felt so alone. That is the thing nobody tells you about the home front. Everybody thanks the soldier, and they should. Nobody thinks about the 28-year-old woman standing in a dark kitchen, holding 2 pieces of paper, trying to keep a whole life from coming apart, while the one person who was supposed to hold it up with her is on the other side of the planet, allowed to call for 15 minutes if the connection holds. Derek felt it worse, if that is possible, because he could do nothing. That is its own particular torture. Being the man who was supposed to protect his family and being physically unable to drive to a bank, or stand in a courtroom, or even hold his wife while she falls apart. Our calls that week were terrible. He was angry and helpless, and I was exhausted and scared. And twice we said things to each other that we did not mean, because that is what fear does to 2 people who love each other and cannot touch. And after one of those calls, the bad one, the one where he went quiet in a way that frightened me more than yelling, I made myself a promise on that kitchen floor. I was not going to let a billboard and a portal take my family apart. I did not know how yet, but I was done crying on the floor. The next morning I did the smartest thing I did in the whole ordeal, and I did it almost by accident. Another guard spouse, an older woman named Diane, whose husband had done 3 deployments before he retired, was the one giving me and the kids rides that week. And when I told her, embarrassed, sobbing a little in her passenger seat while the kids were in school, what was happening, she did not gasp or pity me. She got very still and very focused, the way people do when they have seen a problem before and know it has a solution. And she said 4 words that changed everything. She said, "Have you called legal?"
I have thought a lot since then about why I did not know. I was a guard wife of 6 years. Nobody had ever sat me down and told me that a free attorney who specialized in exactly my nightmare was sitting in a building I drove past every week.
The soldier gets briefings, the family gets a potluck and a phone tree. And I do not say that bitterly, because the phone tree is how I met Diane, and the potluck is real community. But there is a gap, a wide one, between what a military family is entitled to and what a military family is ever told. And companies like the ones that came for us live in that gap. They count on you not knowing. My whole story, everything that turned on the fact that one woman in a minivan closed that gap for me with a single question at a stoplight. I did not know what she meant. Legal. She explained it to me at a red light, talking fast, because Diane had been through this world for 20 years and knew where the doors were that people like me did not even know existed. Every base and most units have a legal assistance office, staffed by JAG, the military's own attorneys. And it is free. And it is not just for the soldier. It is for the family, for the dependents, for me. And the thing those attorneys deal with all day, every day, the thing they know better than anyone else in the entire country, is a federal law with a boring name that I had never once heard, called the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act. Diane said it like it was a magic word, and it turned out to be one. The Servicemembers Civil Relief Act, the SCRA. She could not tell me the details, she was not a lawyer, but she told me the shape of it, and the shape of it was this. The United States government, a very long time ago, decided that men and women who were deployed to serve the country should not come home to find that their financial lives had been dismantled while they were gone, by people taking advantage of the fact that they could not be there to fight back. So Congress passed a law. And that law, Diane said, had teeth. Real ones. And the two companies coming after my family had, in their arrogance, walked directly into them. I made an appointment with the base legal assistance office for the next day. I remember I could barely sleep that night, and it was the first time in a week that it was not entirely from dread. There was something else underneath it now, small and hard and cold, like a stone in my pocket I could close my hand around. I did not have money. I did not have my husband. But maybe, for the first time, I was about to have something those companies had bet the whole game on me never getting. I was about to have the law read to me by someone who knew exactly how to use it. The legal assistance office was in a plain brick building on the base, past the gate where Diane's husband's old sticker got us waved through, down a hall that smelled like every government building in America, floor wax and old coffee. The attorney I met was a captain, a woman maybe a few years older than me, in uniform, with a folder of my papers I had emailed ahead already open on her desk, and, I noticed, already tabbed with little colored flags. She did not make me tell the whole story from the beginning. She had read it. She looked up at me, and the first thing she said, before anything about the law, was, "This was not your fault, and they broke the law doing it, and we are going to fix it." I started crying again, right there, and she just slid a box of tissues across the desk, like she kept it there for exactly this. Then she taught me the law, patiently, in plain words, because she said the only way I would stop being afraid was to understand exactly what I was holding. The Servicemembers Civil Relief Act, she said, covers active duty service members, and yes, that includes National Guard soldiers like Derek when they are called to active federal duty for a deployment, which he was. From the day his active orders began, a whole set of protections switched on around not just him, but around me and the kids too. Because dependents are covered. And these companies, she said,
tapping the repossession paperwork, either did not know that, which was negligence, or knew it and did it anyway, which was worse. The truck was the clearest violation, and she started there because she wanted me to feel one solid win before we got to the harder parts. Under the SCRA, she explained, if a service member took out a car loan and made at least one payment before going on active duty, which Derek had done for 2 years, then the lender cannot repossess that vehicle during his active service without a court order. Not a late notice, not a default, not a repossession truck in the night. A court order signed by a judge, and there had been no court, no order, no judge. They had simply sent a tow truck to a deployed soldier's driveway and taken his family's vehicle. And in doing that, she said, they had not just made a mistake. They had committed a violation that under this law could be both a civil matter and, she let the word sit there, a criminal one. I asked her, and I remember my voice was small, whether that meant we could get the truck back. She said yes, not maybe, yes. And more than that, she said, the law did not just require them to return it. It allowed us to recover damages, actual damages, for what the loss had cost us. And it opened the door to penalties on top of that. The lender had reached into our lives, thinking there was no one home to fight them. And it turned out, the person they most needed to worry about was a captain in a plain brick building whose entire job was to know this exact law better than their whole legal department did. Then we got to the harder one, the eviction. And she surprised me, because I had assumed that was the weaker case. It was not. The SCRA, she explained, also protects a service member's family from being evicted from their home during active duty, without going through a court. And even then, a judge is required to consider the deployment and can stay the eviction, put it on hold, for 90 days or longer, precisely because Congress understood that a family should not be thrown into the street while the service member is unable to appear and defend them. The management company's 30-day form letter, the one that had made me sob on the kitchen floor, was not the trump card they thought it was. It was, the captain said, almost a confession, because it showed they had targeted us the moment they learned Derek was deployed. And then she showed me the part I had gotten completely backward, the part that turned my stomach with how upside down it all was. I had been trapped in that lease, afraid to move the kids somewhere cheaper because breaking it meant losing our deposit and paying 2 months' rent as a penalty. The captain slid a single page across the desk, the text of one section of the SCRA, and told me to read it slowly. Under this law, a service member who receives deployment orders for 90 days or more has the right to terminate a residential lease early, with no penalty, no forfeited deposit, nothing, simply by giving the landlord written notice and a copy of the military orders. The lease I had been afraid I was chained to was one I had been legally free to walk away from, without paying a dime, from the day Derek's orders arrived. I sat there and I did the math out loud. The management company was not just wrong to threaten eviction. They were trying to force out and penalize a family that had every right under federal law to leave that house for free whenever it chose. They had it exactly reversed. They thought they held all the power, and the truth was they had been sitting on a legal obligation to let us go, and instead of honoring it, they had sent a letter designed to frighten a scared young mother out of a home. The captain watched me work it out, and when I got there, she almost smiled. "Now you understand," she said. "Now you are not afraid anymore. Now you are just organized." That became the word for the next 2 months, organized, because here is what I learned about how the law actually works, as opposed to how it works in movies. Nobody swept in and fixed it in a scene. What happened instead was slow and unglamorous, and in its own way more satisfying than any shouting match could have been. The captain and I, and by extension Derek from 10,000 miles away, built a paper trail so clean and so complete that the two companies who thought they were dealing with a helpless family found themselves dealing with the United States government's own attorneys and a federal statute with penalties attached to every line. The captain gave me homework, and I threw myself at it like it was the only solid ground in a flood, which it was. She wanted everything. The original loan documents, every statement, the exact dates of Derek's active orders, which proved the protections had switched on. She wanted me to write out, in my own plain words, a timeline of every single thing that had happened, with dates, from the first message at 4 a.m. forward. She wanted screenshots of the voicemail I had left the lender, saying the payment would be short and would be caught up. Because that message, she said, turned out to matter, since it showed I had been in contact and acting in good faith while they were quietly winding up the tow truck. I stayed up nights doing it, after the kids were down, at the same kitchen table where I had done my drowning math. Except now, the same table felt different, because now the paper stacking up on it was not bills closing in. It was a case being built. There is a particular kind of calm that comes over you when you stop being a victim of a process and start being the author of one. I would sit there with my folders and my sticky notes and my careful dates, and for the first time in weeks, I would look at the mess on the table and feel something other than fear. I felt like I was doing the one thing Derek had asked Noah to do on that cold tarmac. I was helping. I was, in my own way, standing between my family and the door. I learned to be patient, which is not my strength. The law moves at the speed of certified mail and business days, and there were stretches where nothing seemed to happen, and the old fear would try to creep back in, whispering that maybe the letter had not worked. Maybe these companies were too big. Maybe I had gotten my hopes up. The captain talked me down more than once. She told me something I have never forgotten. She said, "The reason they win so often is not that they are strong. It is that people give up right before the part where they would have won, because the waiting is designed to make you give up. Do not give up in the waiting." And then she said, almost offhand, "The part they never see coming is the end. And the end of this one is going to be worth it. I promise you." Save that thought for the hard nights. I did save it. I need to tell you about one of those hard nights, because it had a small point of light in it that I have held on to ever since. It was a Sunday, one of the empty ones, and I was low, and the kids could feel it the way kids always can. And Noah, my serious 7-year-old, disappeared into his room after dinner. He came out 20 minutes later and put a piece of paper in front of me on the table, right on top of the loan statements. And it was a drawing. It was our house and our truck in the driveway, and 4 stick figures holding hands. And over the top he had written, in the careful, crooked letters of a first grader, "We are okay." He had heard more than I thought, my boy. He had heard the fear in the house, and he had decided, at 7, to hand his mother a promise back. I put that drawing in the front of the case folder, ahead of every legal document, and it is still there. Because that is the thing those companies never factor into their smooth math. They see a defaulted account, and a deployed service member, and a scared spouse, and they see an easy file. They do not see the 7-year-old drawing, "We are okay." They do not see the older neighbor who has done this before, pulling into your driveway to take your kids to school without being asked. They do not see the captain in the plain brick office keeping a box of tissues on her desk, because she has watched this exact thing happen to family after family, and has decided to spend her career on the other side of it. There is a whole invisible army on the home front, and its weapons are patience and paperwork and small kindnesses, and it does not lose as often as people like that assume. The first thing the legal assistance office did was send letters. Not angry letters, cold ones, precise ones, on official letterhead citing the exact sections of the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act, one to the lender and one to the property management company.
The letter to the lender laid out the facts plainly. The service member was on active duty, had made payments before entering service, and the vehicle had been repossessed with no court order, in direct violation of the Act. It demanded the immediate return of the truck at no cost to us, the reversal of every fee, and it noted, in the flat language that lawyers use when they are being the most dangerous, that violations of this provision carried civil liability and potential criminal penalties, and that the matter would be referred to the Department of Justice if not promptly cured. The letter to the property management company was just as cold. It informed them that any attempt to evict the family during the service member's active duty without a court order and judicial review violated the SCRA. It informed them, further, that under the same act, the family had the right to terminate the lease with no penalty, and that we were hereby exercising that right, with a copy of the orders enclosed, effective per the statute. In other words, the same letter that stopped their eviction also handed them our notice that we were leaving on our terms, owing them nothing, taking our full deposit with us. They had tried to push us out the door to punish us. The captain opened that same door and walked us through it with our heads up and our money in our pockets. I wish you could have seen how fast the tone changed. The lender's customer service line, the maze that had recited fees at me in a soothing voice for a week, suddenly had a supervisor. And then the supervisor had a manager. And then, within about 72 hours of that letter landing, I had a direct line to someone in what they called their military compliance department. A department I strongly suspect they invented sometime between our letter and my call. The soothing was gone. In its place was the careful, nervous courtesy of people who have just realized that the file they were about to send to auction has the Department of Justice's shadow falling across it. The truck came home 11 days after the captain sent the letter. I want to describe it exactly, because I had pictured this moment on the kitchen floor, and it was somehow both smaller and bigger than I imagined. A flatbed pulled up in front of the house on a Tuesday afternoon, and a driver, who clearly had no idea about any of it, rolled Derek's truck down the ramps and set it in our driveway, in the same oil-stained rectangle it had been taken from, and handed me a clipboard to sign. That was all. No apology from anyone who mattered. But Noah came off the school bus 20 minutes later and saw it, and dropped his backpack in the yard and just stood there. And then he ran to it, and put both hands flat on the tailgate, like he was checking it was real. And I had to turn around so my 7-year-old would not see his mother cry over a truck. I called Diane before I called anyone else, before I even called Derek, because Diane was the one who had said the word. She did not say, "I told you so." She just went quiet on the line for a second, and then said, in that steady voice of hers, "Welcome to the club, honey, the one where we look out for each other." And I understood that she was handing me something. She had carried me for 2 months in her passenger seat, and now she was telling me that someday it would be my turn to be the one at the red light telling some other terrified young spouse the word she needs to hear. That is how it works on the home front. The kindness moves forward. You take the ride when you need it, and later you give it. That first drive in the returned truck, I took the kids to get ice cream, because it felt like something you were supposed to do. And I sat in a parking lot watching Emma get a cone all over her face, and Noah explained to her very seriously that the truck was back because Mom made them bring it back. And I thought about how close we had come to losing all of it, and how the difference had not been money or luck. The difference had been one older woman at a red light who knew where a door was. I have never in my life been so grateful for a stranger who became a friend. There was a strange grief mixed into the relief of those days that I did not expect and want to name, because I think other spouses feel it and think something is wrong with them. Getting the truck back did not erase the 2 months. Emma had learned, at 4, that sometimes mommy cannot fix things, and that is a thing a 4-year-old is not supposed to learn yet. Noah had spent weeks being a small, stoic man when he should have been a boy who did not have to think about words like default and eviction. I had missed shifts and strained a good boss's patience and lain awake doing math that no young family should have to do. You can win the case and still be handed back a version of your life with new dents in it. The law can return the truck. It cannot return the nights. But getting the truck back was only the return of what was ours. It was not yet justice, and the captain was very clear with me about the difference. Giving back a thing you stole is not a consequence. It is just the floor. What the law allowed and what we pursued next was the part that made sure this cost them something. Because a company that can steal a truck and, if caught, simply give it back, has no reason ever to stop. So we documented the damages. Every ride I had to beg. The daycare I nearly lost because I could not reliably get Emma there. The pay I lost from shifts I missed. The fees they had piled on. And the captain referred the whole file, exactly as the letter had warned, to the Department of Justice unit that enforces the SCRA. That was the thing the lender had never counted on. They were used to individual soldiers or scared spouses who did not know the law and could not afford a lawyer and would eventually just go away. They were not used to a federal enforcement office whose entire mission is to go through a company's records and find every other service member they did this to. Because that was the question the moment our file crossed the right desk. If they did it to us this casually, this routinely, with a form process and a night tow, then how many other military families had they done it to? A company does not build a smooth machine for one repossession. They build it to run. The captain explained the enforcement side to me plainly, because she did not want me to expect a phone call the next week. This part is slow, she said, and it is not yours to carry anymore once you hand it over. Your job was to survive it and document it, and you did both. The federal attorneys would subpoena the records, sample the accounts, look for the pattern, and if the pattern was there, they would not settle for fixing one truck. They would make the company find and repay everyone. It could take a year or more, she said, and I would probably read about the outcome in the news before anyone officially told me. But the machine that had run over my family was, from the day my file was accepted, being taken apart by mechanics far better than the ones who built it. While the federal side ground forward on its own slow schedule, the local pieces resolved fast because the companies wanted them to. The eviction was not merely stopped, it evaporated. The management company, faced with the SCRA letter and the plain fact that they had tried to penalize a family that had a federal right to leave for free, did not even wait for a hearing. They returned our full deposit, released us from the lease with a written acknowledgement that we owed nothing, and I moved the kids into a smaller, cheaper place across town, closer to Diane, before Derek was even halfway home. I hung our little flag on the new porch myself. The lender settled the civil side, rather than let it go in front of a judge. The captain negotiated it, and I sat in her office for the call, with my hands folded in my lap, trying to look like a person who did this all the time. They reversed every fee, of course. They refunded the storage charges and the repossession fee and credited the account. But beyond that, they paid actual damages for what the loss had cost our family. A figure with real weight to it. Enough that the missed pay and the daycare scramble and the 2 months of my life spent on their maze were accounted for in dollars. And they corrected Derek's interest rate, because it turned out there was one more violation I had not even known about. That was the part I want every military family listening to write down, because we never would have caught it ourselves. The captain, going through Derek's loan, found that the SCRA also caps the interest rate on any debt a service member took on before active duty at 6% for the duration of that active duty. Derek's ugly loan, the one we signed at 26 with our good knees and our long future, had been running the whole deployment at more than double that. The lender was legally required to have knocked it down to 6% the day his order started, and they simply had not, because we did not know to ask and they did not volunteer it. So they went back and recalculated every payment of the deployment at 6% and credited us the difference. Hundreds of dollars we had overpaid without ever knowing we were protected. I want to describe the settlement call itself because it was nothing like I had imagined and everything I needed. I had pictured, on the bad nights, some dramatic confrontation, someone finally admitting out loud that they had wronged us, an apology I could hold. That is not what happened, and the captain had warned me it would not be. What happened was a conference call full of careful, lawyerly voices, the compliance manager and an attorney for the company, and the captain, and me. And it was almost boring. And that was the point. There was no yelling. There was just a list of facts that the company could no longer pretend were not facts, read out one by one, and a set of numbers attached to each one. Underneath their careful courtesy was the sound of a company that had done the arithmetic and realized that fighting a federal statute in front of a judge would cost them far more than making my family whole. I did not gloat. I want to say that clearly, because I thought I would want to, and when the moment came, I did not. When it was my turn to speak, I did not throw their billboard back at them or make them grovel. I just told them, evenly, what it had actually been like. The fever day, the math on the receipt, my son's drawing. I told them a real family had been on the other end of their process, and that the reason I had fought was not the money. It was so that the next family would not have to. The line was quiet when I finished. The captain told me afterward that in 10 years, she had rarely seen a company's lawyers go that still. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to people who counted on you being a case number is to make them hear, for 1 minute, that you were a person. And then it was simply done, in the undramatic way real things get done, with signatures and confirmations and a follow-up email. No fanfare, just a truck in my driveway, a deposit back in my account, an interest rate corrected, an eviction that no longer existed, and a federal referral quietly moving forward on its own track. The captain closed my file that day, or the local part of it, and shook my hand, and told me I had done the hard part myself, which was not true, but was kind of her to say. I drove home in the truck, alone, and I pulled into the driveway into that same oil-stained rectangle, and I sat there for a minute, with the engine ticking, and I let myself feel, for the first time in months, that the roof over my family was holding again, and that this time, I had been the one holding it. I need to tell you about the phone call with Derek the night the settlement was done, because it is the real reason I am telling this story at all. It was afternoon where he was, and the connection was good for once, and I told him all of it. The truck home in the new driveway, the deposit back, the fees gone, the interest fixed, the eviction dead. And there was a long quiet on the line, the expensive satellite kind of quiet. And then my husband, my strong, stubborn husband, who fixes diesel engines with his bare hands, said in a voice I had not heard the whole deployment,
I was so scared I was going to come home to nothing.
And I said, "You are coming home to us.
In our home, with everything we own, and it is handled." And he cried, and I cried, and neither of us was ashamed of it. Here is what happened next, because with these stories, the update is always the best part, and this one is better than most. The federal referral did not close quietly. The Department of Justice Enforcement Office did exactly what I had hoped and feared. They went through the lender's records, all of them, going back years. And they found that our family was not a mistake. We were a pattern. The company had repossessed vehicles from other active duty service members without court orders, and had failed to apply the 6% interest cap to who knows how many loans as a matter of ordinary business. What had happened to us on a Tuesday night in our driveway had been happening quietly to soldiers all over. I think about those other families a lot. That is the strangest and best part of the whole thing to sit with. Somewhere in this state, there was another spouse standing in another dark kitchen, doing math on the back of another receipt, and another soldier lying awake 10,000 miles away, feeling like a failure. And they had no idea that a captain in a plain brick building and a scared young mother who had almost given up in the waiting had just pulled a thread that would reach all the way to them. You never meet those people. You just know they got a letter they did not expect, and that some small piece of a wrong that had been done to them quietly got made right, because someone upstream refused to fold. The company entered into a settlement with the Department of Justice. They paid a civil penalty to the United States. They were required to identify and pay restitution to every service member they had wrongfully repossessed from or overcharged. Families who, like us, had mostly never known they had been wronged, and would now get a letter and a check out of nowhere. And they were ordered to rewrite their entire policy, to build real safeguards, real training, a real check against military status before any account went to repossession, so that the next scared spouse in the next dark kitchen in this state would never get the letter I got. The billboard outside the gate could finally tell something like the truth. It took most of a year, exactly as the captain had promised, and she was right that I read about it before anyone called. I saw the headline on my phone one morning while the coffee was brewing and Derek was already at the shop. A short item about a lender that had agreed to pay a penalty and restitution over illegal repossessions from active duty service members, and I stood very still in my kitchen holding my cup, because I knew, in a way no one reading past it would, exactly whose truck and whose 4 a.m. and whose sick little girl were folded into that dry paragraph. I set the phone down, and I did not tell anyone for a minute. I just let myself feel that a thing done in a dark kitchen had reached all the way to a headline. I did not feel triumphant when I read the news of the settlement. That surprised me too. I had expected to feel like I had won something, and instead I felt something quieter and heavier and better. The feeling of a thing having been set right that should never have been wrong in the first place. There is a difference between beating someone and fixing something, and what the law let us do was the second kind, the kind that does not leave you needing anyone on their knees. The company was not destroyed. It was corrected. Its capacity to do this to the next family was taken away from it, permanently, by the government the service members it preyed on had sworn to defend. That is the justice the SCRA is built to deliver, and it is colder and cleaner and more durable than revenge. And I have made my peace with the fact that it is also enough. Derek came home 9 months and 11 days after he left. I brought the kids to the armory in clothes I had bought new for the occasion, and we stood in a gym full of other families, holding signs and balloons and their breath, watching the doors, And when his unit finally filed in, there was that terrible, wonderful moment where every face is a stranger until you find the one that is not. I found him. He found us. And Emma did not entirely remember him at first, which is its own quiet heartbreak that a lot of guard families know. And she hid a little behind my leg, and Derek did not push. He just knelt down to her level, on the gym floor, in his uniform, and said her name the way only he says it, soft and low with a little tune in it. And I watched it land in her, watched some old, deep memory of safety wake up in my 4-year-old. And then she went into his arms and did not let go. Noah did not hang back. Noah walked straight up to his father and shook his hand, man to man, the way he thought a soldier should be greeted. And Derek shook it, gravely, and then pulled him in and held the back of his head. And over Noah's shoulder he looked at me and mouthed, "You did it." And I shook my head and mouthed back, "We did." Because that is the truth of a deployment, that it is a thing a family survives together across an impossible distance, and the medals only ever go to one of them. We drove home in the truck, all 4 of us, in the truck they took, on the roads of the town they thought we would have to leave. Nobody said much. Derek kept one hand on the wheel and one hand on my knee the whole way, and every few minutes he would look in the rear view at the kids in the back like he was checking, the way Noah had checked the tailgate, that it was all real. When we pulled into the driveway of the new place, the smaller, cheaper one I had moved us to on our own terms, he sat for a second, looking at the little flag I had hung by the door, and he said, "This is ours." And it was not a question. And I said, "Free and clear." And he understood everything I meant by it. The months after the homecoming were their own kind of work. The quiet kind nobody warns you about either. A soldier does not step back into his old life like a foot into an old boot. Derek was jumpy at first, quiet in crowds, up at odd hours. And I had changed too, harder in some ways, less willing to be told no by a portal or a phone tree. We had to learn each other again, in the small rooms of the new place. And some of that was tender, and some of it was tears at the kitchen table. But we had a thing to build on that a lot of couples do not, which was the plain proof in our own history now that when it came down to it, we did not fold, either of us. Not him over there, and not me over here. Derek went back to the diesel shop, and one evening a few weeks in, he told me he had spent his lunch break explaining the Servicemembers Civil Relief Act to a younger guy at work whose brother was about to deploy, drawing it out on a napkin, the truck part and the lease part and the 6% part, the way the captain had drawn it for me. He looked almost embarrassed telling me, my quiet husband, that he had become a person who lectured coworkers about a federal statute. But I understood exactly what he was doing. He was closing the gap for someone, the way Diane closed it for us. That is the only real way any of this ever gets better. One napkin, one red light, one scared family told the thing they were never told. I still think about that first message, "Call me when you can," and the cold that went through me in the dark. I thought it was the end of something. It turned out to be the beginning of the part of our marriage I am proudest of. The part where I found out what I was made of, and what my husband's country had quietly promised to families like ours a long time before we ever needed it. The people who came for us bet that a deployed soldier's family was the softest target on the street. They were half right. We were soft in all the ways that matter, tired and scared and stretched thin. But underneath that was a federal law with real teeth. a captain in a plain brick building who knew how to use it, and a spouse who finally stopped crying on the floor and picked up the phone. If you are a service member or you love one, learn this law before you need it. The Servicemembers Civil Relief Act protects the truck, the lease, the interest rate, and the family. And it only works if someone knows to reach for it. Walk into your legal assistance office before there is a problem, not after. And if you are the spouse holding it all together on the home front while someone you love is far away, I see you. What you are doing is service too, even though nobody hands you a folded flag for it. So let me ask you what Derek and I still argue about, gently, on the good nights. When a company steals from a soldier's family and then, the moment they are caught, hands everything back and pays a penalty, is that justice? Or did they get off easy because they only paid money and never once had to look my kids in the eye? Tell me honestly what you think. And tell me where you are listening from tonight, your state and your age, because I am always amazed at how far this reaches. If your family has ever leaned on the SCRA, or wishes it had known about it, say so below. Give this a like if it meant something to you. Subscribe if you want to sit with more stories like it. And take care of your people. I will see you in the next one.